Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Levin TV in our Best Of series for 2021. As you know, from time to time, I use a little fella by the name of Robert Reich as a foil. He puts out these bizarre videos where he basically burps up the usual American Marxist pablum. The government is great, private sector sucks, the Republicans suck, Democrats are good, very deep thinker. In this first part, he wants radical change. He demands radical change. So we have a one-time majority in Congress, in the Senate. It's tied 50-50. It's tied. And in the House, they have a 3 or 4 majority lead, and he says, now's our time with Biden in the office to change everything, forever, for good. And of course, those of you who watch this program know full well that's not the way it's supposed to work. It's a constitutional republic, one Congress and one president during one session or 2 sessions aren't supposed to make permanent change to our governing system, our society. You know what we call that? Totalitarianism. Here it is, part 1, Robert Reich.
This is where freedom rings.
If you believe in America, if you believe in the Constitution empowers us. It's a new day. America's back. America's back, and America's going to get strong again. We're going to defend America, and we're going to defend our interests.
Liberty's voice, Levin TV.
Robert Reich is worried about the GOP cult. What GOP cult? And I don't mean C-O-L-T, I mean C-U-L-T. GOP cult? Cult of what? Seriously, I'm trying to cult of what? Guys that know how to comb their hair and put makeup on for television? When it comes to substance and principles, there's no cult. Anyway, let's listen to Bob. May I call you Bob, Robert? We've invited Bob on the show before, but he's too busy apparently. And I will address him as we listen to him drone on. Go.
I keep hearing that Joe Biden has to govern from the center. He has no choice, they say.
By the way, is he sitting or standing? I don't mean to be offensive. I'm just trying to figure it out. Go ahead.
Razor-thin majorities in Congress, and the Republican Party has moved to the right.
The Republican Party has moved to the right? How so? They spend like drunken Marxists. They're really doing nothing about securing the border and haven't, even when they were in the majority. I'm trying to figure this out. They moved hard to the right. What have they done hard to the right, the Republican Party? In other words, if you don't join in on the crazy crackpot left, you must be a right-winger. Go ahead.
First, there's no center between the reality-based world and the conspiracy-fueled, hate-filled world of today's Republican Party.
What conspiracy-filled, hate-filled world is this goon talking about? Conspiracy about what? You know what's funny? We don't have to make up conspiracies. We don't have to live in conspiracies. These things are really happening. What they're doing to our country, destroying it from the inside. What they're doing to women's sports and illegal immigration, what they're doing to our budget, what they want to do to, with just one thing after another, the police in this country and how they're undermining one effort after another, radical funding of abortions. And we don't have to entertain conspiracies. We're dealing with the reality. It's staring us in the face, and it's very painful. Go ahead.
Second, the problems the country is facing cannot be solved with milquetoast, centrist solutions. They demand immediate, bold action. I've been in or around politics for 50 years. I've served several
Really? You don't look a day over 112. Go ahead.
Presidents who have needed Republican votes. But the Republicans now in Congress are nothing like those I've dealt with. Today's Republican Party is a cult.
Let's slow down. I remember the Republican Party of Jesse Helms, where they used to say the same thing. Jesse Helms, who was such a solid conservative, he would run circles around the Democrats in the Senate. He was a parliamentarian of note. He had studied Robert's rules and so forth. Yes, this Republican Party is much different, ladies and gentlemen. No, it's not. Look at the Senate. You still got McConnell up there and Thune and Cornyn and the other, I was going to say rabble, but I probably shouldn't say that. The other, what should we call them? The gang of 4 or 5? They all sound alike. They all act alike. They have no agenda. Go ahead.
93% of House Republicans voted against impeaching Trump for inciting an insurrection.
The reason that the Republicans voted against impeachment was because the President of the United States didn't incite a riot, let alone incite an insurrection. That's number one. Number two, you don't have an impeachment after 2 hours of debate, 1 hour for each side, no due process, no hearing, no investigation, no witness, no deposition, no counter witness, no documents. You don't do that 6 days before the end of a president's term in office. So those Republicans stood up for the Constitution. Go ahead.
Senate Republicans refused to convict him. This is after Trump's insurrection threatened even their own lives.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. You know, you wonder about the big lie. Biden talked about it. The big lie is, comes from Goebbels, but it really doesn't come from Goebbels. Now, this issue of propaganda, I wrote about it in On Freedom of the Press. I'm not hawking the book. Okay, don't buy it. Don't buy it. I'm not hawking it. I'm just talking about it. Right here in Chapter 5. Given the progressive ideology and democratic attachment of most of the modern media and journalists, their commitment to community journalism, which is social activism journalism, and with the integration of opinion and newsmaking, objective truth increasingly difficult to discern. One of the keys to answering this question of what are we dealing with here is propaganda. Points to Edward Bernays, B-E-R-N-A-Y-S. Bernays, one of his publishers, tells us, pioneered the scientific technique of shaping and manipulating public opinion, which he called engineering consent. Engineering consent. Bernays wrote an entire book on propaganda, which I cite in my book. It's a fascinating and shocking book in many ways. Unfortunately, among those who took to the book were Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels, among others. But where was he first put to use, Bernays? By the Woodrow Wilson administration. The Woodrow Wilson administration, and he was a segregationist, he was a racist, he was also a propagandist, was really the first to use organized, centralized, and it turns out ubiquitous propaganda to advance support for World War I, among other objectives. And so they used Bernays. And Bernays laid out an entire program for marketing, for propaganda with the media, for eliciting individuals to go out in the communities and advance the cause that the government wanted to advance. For Bernays, propaganda was not troubling, but in fact inevitable and useful. The public was not capable of enlightened thinking and decisions in a republic. Therefore, they need to be led by those who supposedly are, or at least by those who self-servingly claim to be. Now you can see where fascists, communists, other autocrats will be attracted to this. He explained that these examples are not given to create the impression that there's anything sinister about propaganda. They are set down rather to illustrate how conscious direction is given to events, how the men behind these events influence public opinion. As such, they are examples of modern propaganda. And he says, modern propaganda is a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relations of the public to an enterprise, idea, or group. The practice of creating circumstances and of creating pictures in the minds of millions of persons is very common. Virtually no important undertaking is now carried out without it. And according to Bernays, there's a new propaganda which takes account not merely of the individual, remember this is the early 1900s, not even of the mass mind alone, but also and especially of the anatomy of society, with its interlocking group formations and loyalties. It sees the individual not only as a cell in the social organism, but as a cell organized into the social unit. Touch a nerve at a sensitive spot, you get an automatic response from certain specific members of the organization. So there's a despotic odor to this. And that was Bernays, even though later in his life he was appalled by people who would use it and so forth and so on. So again, in our country was the Democrats and Woodrow Wilson who were the first to really embrace this. And then you had the Third Reich embracing this, Goebbels embracing it, Goebbels studying Bernays, which of course was also what Woodrow Wilson had used. So when this pipsqueak, and I mean pipsqueak mentally, when this pipsqueak Robert Reich goes on and talks about the cult and the insurrection and the incitement and so forth, he's practicing Bernays-like propaganda, which is what much of the Democrat media do. So he believes now the filibuster must go. Now, all these left-wing Democrats, they never believed the filibuster must go when Clinton was president or Obama was president. Obama used the filibuster. But now we got to get rid of the filibuster rule because they have an agenda. They have a very small majority in the House, really no majority in the Senate. They want to ram through this agenda, and anything that's in the way must be destroyed. Go.
Mitch McConnell may no longer be Senate Majority Leader, but Republicans can still block legislation supported by the vast majority. That's because of a Senate rule called the filibuster. If we have any hope of safeguarding our democracy and ushering in transformative change, Democrats must wield their power to get rid of the filibuster.
So transformative change, not just change, transformative change. Edmund Burke, a brilliant man who he no doubt detests because he's not Karl Marx, Edmund Burke talked about the difference between change and reform. Change is fundamental, and it's intended to undermine the existing society. Reform is not fundamental change. It's an attempt to modify or adjust. Look at his face. They talk about transformative change. The Constitution does not empower anybody to impose transformative change. You have an amendment process. They don't even care about the amendment process. That Biden and the Congress, they're just spending, doing whatever they want. They haven't even amended the Constitution, and part of the transformative change is to get rid of it. Go.
The filibuster is a Senate rule requiring a 60-vote supermajority.
And by the way, it wasn't that long ago, a couple of decades ago, it required 67 votes. So they lowered the number to 60. 67 votes. Go.
Which means a minority of senators can often block legislation that the vast majority of Americans want and need.
Let's stop. But it also means you can block legislation that the vast majority of Americans don't want and don't need. And the purpose of the filibuster rule isn't to do what Americans want to do fast, because it can change over time, the attitude of the American people. It's to slow the process down so people can think about stuff. You and I have no idea what they're doing on Capitol Hill. The filibuster slows things down so you and I can learn what's going on. So they always talk about the people, when in fact they're trying to impose things, rush things through that will affect your life, maybe destroy your business or your job before you even know what's going on. Go.
Not in the Constitution. In fact, it's arguably unconstitutional.
Really, it's not in the Constitution. Are executive orders in the Constitution? No. Is the Environmental Protection Agency in the Constitution? No. We can all play this game. The vast majority of what the Democrats do and what they promote has nothing to do with the Constitution. The filibuster is unconstitutional. Go ahead.
Alexander Hamilton regarded a supermajority rule as a, quote, poison that would lead to contemptible compromises of the public good.
Alexander Hamilton, interesting, supported the Constitution. And in the Constitution that Robert Reich cites, it says that the Senate shall make its own rules. The Senate shall make its own rules. So the Senate is empowered to put in place a filibuster rule. So how can it be unconstitutional? And by the way, unfortunately, Alexander Hamilton wasn't around as long as some of the others as a result of a duel with Aaron Burr, but we needn't go there. Go ahead.
Without the filibuster, Senate Republicans already have outsized influence. The 50 of them represent 41.5 million fewer Americans than the 50 Senate Democrats. Wyoming, with 579,000...
Right, so now he's arguing to get rid of the Senate. Is he not? He's arguing to get rid of the Senate because from his perspective and premise, it's we want a pure democracy. But he doesn't really want a pure democracy because he wants all these departments and government agencies and bureaucrats to control your life. So when it actually comes to freedom and what you're going to do every day in your own life, he doesn't support that. So this is what they do. They go and they say, hey, look, we need more power because we represent more people. Okay, so we get rid of the Senate? If he had his druthers, he would. What else should we get rid of? The Electoral College? Yes, if he had his druthers. Why? Because people will go through the process of voting, but they won't have any options. You'll be voting for your own demise. Go ahead.
Gets 2 senators. California, with 40 million, also gets 2.
You folks, you understand that Alexander Hamilton wrote most of the essays in the Federalist Papers. He just cites Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton argues persuasively and aggressively for the adoption of the United States Constitution, including the Senate. So he moves from attacking the filibuster rule to attacking the Senate, the existence of the Senate. This is why you need to listen very carefully to these buffoons. I don't care how many universities this man is taught at. I don't care how many degrees he has. In the end, what is it about? In the end, it's about this. He doesn't believe in our constitutional system. He doesn't believe in the vote. He's trying to manipulate the system so they can acquire as much power as they can for the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party conducts itself, and I'm serious about this, it has the mentality of a communist party.
Meanwhile, Republican-controlled states are gearing up to pass even more restrictive voting laws, along with additional partisan gerrymandering that could enable Republicans...
So let's stop right here. When did gerrymandering start? Did it start with Republicans? Did it start today? Gerrymandering is named after a politician whose name was Jerry, his last name. Gerrymandering's been around for a very, very long time in this country, and it basically means the party, after the census, that has control of the numbers in a particular state, the state legislatures can make the congressional districts. How else would you do it? Hand it to a bunch of fools like him so they can manipulate the process, take it out of the hands of the people? If the people voted for more Republicans than Democrats in a given period of time, then the Republicans determine where the congressional seats are, just like the Democrats do in the states that they control. Now, there are certain limitations given the civil rights laws and so forth, but, you know, the general rule is, without the exceptions, that the party in power makes those decisions. What's wrong with that? He says he wants representative government, right? He said, let's get rid of the Senate, but he really wants courts to step in, or experts, quote unquote, to step in and make these determinations where you have no input whatsoever. Doesn't matter who you vote for. This guy talks out of, if he had 10 sides of his mouth, he'd be talking out of 10 sides of his mouth. So now he wants to get rid of gerrymandering. Then he talks about the reforms that some of these states are trying to institute, because their electoral systems were hijacked by state judges, by election officials, by governors, when the Constitution gives that authority, as you know, you've listened to this program, to the state legislature. So you see how he twists every single thing to get what he wants, to get to the ends, because the ends justify the means. And when they have one-party control, you will never recognize this country again. Go.
In Washington, to maintain power for the next decade, the best way to prevent this is with national election standards through the For the People Act.
Stop. And everything national, centralized, but for the people. How much say do you have what goes on in Washington, D.C.? Who do you call on the phone if you have an issue? Nobody. So they take John Lewis's name, they put it on a voting rights bill, which basically takes every outrageous voting agenda that they have in states like California and New York and tries to nationalize it. We've talked about this too. And so they want to claim that this will increase the number of people who vote. It sure will. 16 and 17-year-olds get to register. It doesn't talk about citizens. It talks about individuals. You can't check somebody's citizenship at all. So illegal aliens or people can vote in multiple places. You're not allowed to go over your voter rolls to make sure they're clean and correct. So you see this guy? This guy, look at his face. This is the face of American Marxism. This is the face of a propagandist and a demagogue. And I'm not kidding. Step by step by step by step, you can see it's all intended to twist and to turn and to connive in order to get an end result. Go.
John Lewis Voting Rights Act. But you see, these important bills are stymied as long as the filibuster remains in place. The filibuster is rooted
So they should be able to change the entire voting system in every state. They should be able to take your private health care away from you. They should be able to do whatever they want if they have 51 votes in the Senate and they have 6 or 7 majority in a House of 435 people. That's called faction. That's exactly what the founders were concerned about. If you read the Federalist Papers, they're concerned about a temporary faction taking control, which is exactly what this man's calling for. He is calling for tyranny. He's calling for totalitarianism. That is the mindset. This is the entire argument. Destroy the Constitution's firewalls, undermine the right to vote, undermine it by having anyone and everybody vote as many times as they can get away with. That's the nature of tyranny. Go.
In the 19th century, Southern senators crafted the talking filibuster, in which a member could delay the passage of a bill with a long-winded...
Why doesn't he talk about when Barack Obama was a senator and he used the filibuster? Why doesn't he talk about when Joe Biden was a senator and he used the filibuster? Why doesn't he talk about the entire Democrat Party and its support for slavery and segregation? He's a member of that party, bizarrely. Why doesn't he talk about Bob Byrd and the 1964 and 65 Civil Rights Act? You don't have to go back to John Calhoun, a Democrat. And by the way, you don't have to go down to the South. When they had busing for integration purposes, which many people opposed of all races for a lot of reasons having nothing to do with race, you know where some of the worst violence occurred? In Boston, Massachusetts. Last time I checked, Boston, Massachusetts ain't Jackson, Mississippi.